Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I suppose we should be thankful that this is a government that even 2 or 3 years after they introduced a meaningless provision has had the fortitude to step up and say we got it wrong and we're going to change it back. But unfortunately, it's that the fact that we are doing this, here we are less than 24 hours after the introduction of this great game-changing budget, is that we are spending time now having to undo the unnecessary things that were done some years ago. It is symbolic, unfortunately, not only of what their budget overall represents, but what this government represents. Tinkering around and faffing around the edges rather than doing anything meaningful and substantial. And if there's anything that is needed in our country today, and particularly in tertiary education, it is to attract as many as we can to get there. If there's one thing that New Zealand needs, like so many other countries, in the grip of recession, in the grip of world-changing times, we actually need to be focusing on and investing on our young people, building up our skills base, our education, and the talented people that we've got. But what we've got is a government that is not interested in that, fiddles around the edges. It's introduced the other measure in terms of the student loan scheme that is going to put pressure on those on the lower income end of the spectrum who are repaying loans. But this measure here, it was foreseen from the outset, would never have the effect or the impact that was claimed of it, and now it has to be undone. But of all the things, of all the challenges facing this country, and after yesterday's budget, what do we find ourselves on this bright, cheery Friday morning talking about? It is undoing another of this government's mistakes. Now, sadly, there are many more of them. There are many more that we should be undoing. But actually, it takes away from what is most important, and that is doing the genuine heavy lifting work of making policy, making economic policy and social policy that is about rebuilding this nation and its people so that we can thrive and prosper in the future. There is nothing in this part of this bill, the Taxation Budget Measures Bill, that is going to address the very serious issues that we've got. So what are we left to do? What is this Parliament's time left to do? Undo measures that it brought in that were never going to have any meaningful or substantial impact at all. And that's what we're reduced to doing now. And it's not as if there aren't issues crying out for attention. It's not as if this is not a country that is crying out for a decent budget. We've yet to see it. And yesterday's one doesn't cut the mustard and barely passes mark. It does nothing meaningful or substantial. And we have some big challenges ahead. And education and tertiary education lies at the heart of a program that is about building a future for New Zealand, retaining our young people here. When we look at the 54,000 people a year now, unprecedented numbers leaving the country, so many of them are our talented, young, skilled people who are taking the skills that we as a community have invested in, and they take them offshore. And the tragedy is that whereas 20 or 30 years ago, these are the people who would come back, they would bring their international level skills back, now they are not coming back. Now they are not coming back. And we need a student loan scheme, if we need one at all, that does not create further incentive to lose our young people overseas. And instead of dealing with the real issues about tertiary education funding and financing, both of the student and of the institution, instead of talking about the real issues about how we're going to improve or maximise tertiary education provision, we are left here in this mighty Parliament of Parliaments to talk about undoing measures, silly measures that this government knew at the time wouldn't work and now have to backtrack and get out of them. That's a tragedy. It's a travesty. And it is so symbolic of so much of what happens and passes for good lawmaking under this government. So, sir, we welcome this measure, but we understand the symbolism of it, and it is disappointing that we have to spend our time and budget time at a time when this country is looking for genuine policy leadership and economic leadership, that we have to divert our attention to these sorts of things. So, sir, we support the measure, but let's not hide from the fact, let's not obscure the fact that it was pointless to begin with, and it now has to be undone.
Megan Woods.
Excellent call, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I'm happy to take a call on this. As my colleagues have said, that we are happy to support this because this was legislation that was wrong from the outset. This was legislation that did not do anything to encourage tertiary education in this country. This was legislation that did nothing to improve us and lead us on the path to being an economy that was truly based on legislation. We see this as one small beacon of light in this legislation that we're debating this morning, this very important legislation that we've come back under urgency to debate about how we're going to fix our great nation. We're talking about the scrapping of a half-baked scheme that was doomed to fail. And what we're not seeing in its place, we've